Welcome to the Midnight Tales podcast. Today we have a short story about a couple of hikers who goes into the woods, but never return. I won't spoil the story by sharing too much now, but let me tell you it's a nice little listen. And my apologies for the recording. It's allergy season for me, so I have a chronic cold. But let's get started. Hike of No Return. Part 1. Emma and David had been looking forward to this weekend for months. Both avid hikers and nature enthusiasts, they had planned a getaway to a remote trail they had heard about from fellow hikers. Nestled deep within a sprawling national forest, the trail promised breathtaking views, solitude, and a chance to disconnect from the world. The couple arrived at the trailhead early in the morning, the sun just beginning to peek over the horizon. They loaded up their backpacks with essentials, water, snacks, a first aid kit, and a map, and set off into the wilderness. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of pine and earth, and the forest around them was alive with sounds of birds and rustling leaves. "This is perfect," Emma said, taking a deep breath and smiling at David. "Just what we needed." David nodded, squeezing her hand. "Absolutely. It feels good to get away from everything and just to be out here with you." They walked in comfortable silence for a while, taking in the beauty of their surroundings. The trail wound through dense forest and babbling streams up rocky inclines that offered stunning views of the valley below. It was challenging but rewarding, exactly the kind of adventure they loved. A few hours into the hike, as they rounded a bend in the trail, they saw another hiker coming towards them. It was a tall man with a rugged appearance, dressed in a well-worn hiking gear and carrying a large backpack. He smiled warmly as he approached. "Good morning," he called out, waving. "Morning," David replied cheerfully. "Beautiful day for a hike, isn't it?" "Sure is," the man said, stopping to chat. "Name's Mark. You two out for a weekend adventure?" "Yeah, I'm David, and this is Emma," David said, introducing them. "We've been looking forward to this trail for a while." "Nice to meet you both," Mark said. "I've hiked this trail a few times. It's one of my favorites. If you need any tips or run into any trouble, just let me know." "Thanks. I appreciate that," Emma said, smiling but feeling a slight twinge of unease she couldn't quite place. They chatted for a few more minutes, exchanging pleasantries and discussing the best spot to camp along the trail. Mark seemed friendly and knowledgeable, putting David at ease. Eventually, they said their goodbyes and continued on their way, Mark heading in the opposite direction. The day passed peacefully. Emma and David found a perfect spot to set up the camp for the night, a clearing and a stunning view of the sunset over the mountains. They built a small fire, cooked dinner, and talked about everything and nothing, enjoying the tranquility of the moment. As they settled into the tent for the night, Emma couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had crept in earlier. "Do you think it's weird we ran into someone out here?" she asked David. David shrugged. "Not really. It's a popular trail. Besides, Mark seemed nice enough. Just another hiker enjoying the outdoors." "I guess you're right," Emma said, trying to dismiss her worries. "I'm probably just being paranoid." "Hey, we're out here to relax," David said, pulling her close. "Let's just enjoy it." Emma nodded, snuggling against him. As the night fell and the sounds of the forest enveloped them, she tried to push the unease from her mind. But deep down, she couldn't help but feel that the paths crossing with Mark had been more than just a coincidence. Part 2. The next morning, Emma and David woke to the sound of the forest coming to life. Birds chirped merrily, and the sunlight filtered through the canopy above them, casting doubled shadows on their tent. After a quick breakfast, they packed up the gear and set off onto the trail again, eager to explore more of the beautiful landscape. As they hiked, they fell into a comfortable rhythm, the miles slipping by as they talked and laughed. David pointed out interesting plants and animals, while Emma snapped photos to document the adventure. The unease Emma had felt the previous night had mostly faded, replaced by the joy of being in nature with the man she loved. Around midday, they decided to take a break near a crystal-clear stream. They sat on a large rock, dipping their feet in the cool water and enjoying a snack. The tranquility was soothing, and Emma found herself relaxing completely. Out of nowhere, a voice broke the silence. "Hey there, mind if I join you?" Startled, Emma and David looked up to see Mark standing a few feet away, his friendly smile intact. He had appeared so silently that neither of them had heard his approach. "Mark, sure, have a seat," David said, gesturing to a nearby rock. Mark settled down, setting his backpack beside him. "I didn't expect to run into you two again. How's the hike going?" "Great," David replied. "We've covered a lot of ground and seen some amazing views." "Glad to hear it," Mark said. "This stream is one of my favorite spots. Perfect place to cool off." Emma forced a smile, trying to ignore the niggling feeling of discomfort. "It's beautiful here," she agreed. They chatted for a while, but Emma couldn't shake the sense that something was off. Mark's presence felt intrusive, as she found herself watching him closely, looking for any signs of threat. But he continued to act friendly and harmless, sharing tips about the trail and recounting stories from his previous hikes. Eventually, Mark stood up and stretched. "Well, I better get going. Still have a long way to go today. Maybe I'll see you both around." "Take care," said David, waving as Mark walked away. Emma watched him disappear down the trail, her unease returning in full force. "He's everywhere we go," she said quietly. "It's like he's following us." David shook his head. "I'm sure it's just a coincidence. We are all on the same trail after all." "Maybe," Emma said, not entirely convinced. They continued the hike, but the mood had shifted. Emma found herself constantly looking over her shoulder, half expecting Mark to appear at any moment. By late afternoon, they reached another picturesque campsite and decided to set up for the night. As they were unpacking, Emma realized her water bottle was missing. "I could have sworn I packed it this morning," she said, frowning. David looked around the campsite. "It must have fallen out somewhere along the trail. We'll just have to make do with what we have." They made dinner and settled in for the evening, but Emma's nerves were on edge. She couldn't shake the feeling that Mark's repeated appearances weren't mere chance. When they finally crawled into the tent, she voiced her concerns again. "David, I really think we should turn back tomorrow," she said. "Something doesn't feel right." David sighed. "Emma, you're letting your imagination get the best of you. I haven't seen any real signs of danger. Mark's just another hiker." Emma wanted to argue, but she knew it would only lead to more tension. "Okay," she said reluctantly. "But if I see him again, I'm heading back." "Deal," David said, pulling her close. "Now, let's try to get some sleep." Despite David's reassurance, Emma lay awake for a long time, listening to the sounds of the forest and jumping at every little noise. Eventually, exhaustion overcame her, and she drifted into an uneasy sleep. The next day dawned clear and bright, but Emma's sense of foreboding had lessened. They packed up camp and set off again, the beautiful scenery unable to dispel her anxiety. As they hiked, Emma kept her eyes peeled for any sign of Mark. In the late afternoon, they rounded a bend in the trail and saw him again. He was sitting on a log, seemingly waiting for them. Emma's heart sank, and she knew in that moment that her instincts had been right all along. "Fancy meeting you here," Mark said with a grin that no longer seemed friendly. David's face tightened, and Emma could see he was starting to share her unease. "Yeah, seems like we keep crossing paths," David said carefully. Mark stood up, his demeanor shifting slightly. "It's a small world out here, isn't it? You know, it's not often I meet people as interesting as you two." Emma's heart pounded in her chest. She glanced at David, who gave her a subtle nod. They needed to leave, and fast. "Well, we've got a lot of ground to cover before dark," David said, forcing a smile. "See you around, Mike." "Yeah, see you," Emma echoed, her voice shaky. They walked away, trying to keep the pace calm and steady, but as soon as they were out of sight, they broke into a run, adrenaline surging. They didn't know where they were going, only that they needed to put as much distance between themselves and Mark as possible. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the forest floor, Emma and David found themselves in a part of the trail that was unfamiliar. Panic set in as they realized they were lost. "We need to find our way back to the main trail," David said, his voice urgent. Emma nodded, trying to steady her breathing. "He's out there, David. I know it." David squeezed her hand. "It'll be okay. We just have to stay together." But deep down, they both knew the danger was real. The darkness closing in around them was more than just the setting sun. Part 3. The forest grew darker as the night fell, the trees casting long, menacing shadows. Emma and David, exhausted and lost, trudged through the underbush, their earlier pace slowed by fatigue and fear. "We need to find a place to rest," Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. David nodded, his eyes scanning the surroundings. "Let's keep moving a bit further. We need to find somewhere safe." The tension between them was palpable, each sound in the forest amplified by the heightened senses. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig made Emma's heart race. They walked in silence, the only light coming from their headlamps, casting eerie beams that barely pierced the thickening gloom. Suddenly, they heard a noise behind them. A deliberate, heavy footfall. They froze, fear gripping them both. "Did you hear that?" Emma whispered, her voice trembling. David nodded, slowly turning around. The headlamps cut through the darkness, but they saw nothing. The forest was silent once more, save for the pounding of their own hearts. "Let's keep moving," David said, his voice tight. "We need to find shelter." They picked up the pace, moving as quickly as their weary bodies would allow. But the feeling of being watched, of being hunted, was overwhelming. Emma kept glancing over her shoulder, each time expecting to see Mark's menacing figure emerging from the shadows. They came across a small clearing and decided to set up a temporary camp. It wasn't ideal, but they needed to regroup and plan the next move. David worked quickly to set up a small fire while Emma kept watch. her eyes darting around the perimeter. As the fire crackled to life, providing a small measure of comfort, David sat next to Emma and took her hand. "Going to get through this," he said, his voice filled with determination. Emma nodded, but before she could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed through the clearing. They both jumped to their feet, their hearts pounding. Mark stepped into the firelight, his face twisted into a cruel smile. "Hello again," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "Stay back," David shouted, stepping protectively in front of Emma. Mark took a step forward, the fire casting eerie shadows on his face. "You shouldn't have run," he said, his voice low and menacing. "I was just about to get to know you." David reached for a large stick from the firewood pile, brandishing it like a weapon. "Leave us alone, Mark." Mark's smile widened, but it was devoid of any warmth. "Oh, but where is the fun in that?" Without warning, Mark lunged at David. The two men grappled, the stick falling uselessly to the ground. Emma screamed, looking for something to use as a weapon. She grabbed a heavy rock and rushed forward, but before she could reach them, Mark had overpowered David, slamming him to the ground. "David!" Emma cried out, voice breaking with terror. David struggled to get up, but Mark was relentless. He pulled a knife from his belt and slashed at David, the blade gleaming in the firelight. David cried out in pain, collapsing to the ground. Emma, fueled by desperation, threw the rock at Mark, hitting him in the shoulder. He staggered back, momentarily distracted. She ran to David's side, trying to help him, but he was too injured to move. "Go, Emma," David gasped. "Run!" Tears streamed down her face. Emma knew she couldn't leave him. "I'm not leaving you," she whispered, her voice breaking. Mark recovered quickly, his eyes filled with rage. He advanced on them, the knife still in his hand. Emma positioned herself between David and Mark, ready to fight to the end. "You're brave," Mark said, almost admiringly, "but it won't save you." He lunged again, and Emma tried to fend him off, but he was too strong. The struggle was brief and brutal. With a final, desperate scream, Emma fell beside David, their hands reaching for each other one last time. The forest fell silent, the only sound the crackling of the fire. Mark stood over the lifeless bodies, his breathing heavy. He wiped the knife on his pants and calmly began to erase evidence of his presence. When he was satisfied, he melted back into the shadows, disappearing into the wilderness as if he had never been there at all. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Midnight Tales podcast. I hope you enjoyed the story, and if you would like to listen to even more, or would prefer to read the stories instead, please head to midnighttales.org. You can also support the show by purchasing the stories as ebook for only $1 per book. It's a small amount, but goes a long way in supporting the show. Another way you can support is by liking, subscribing, and sharing the show. Until next time, take care.
Met a man by the trail with a grin so wide, said, "Take a walk with me, I'll be your guide." Beneath the whispering pines where shadows play, in the stillness of night I could feel the fray. Wilderness shadows lurking in the glow, where friendly faces turn to danger unknown. Wilderness whisper, stories left untold. In the heart of the forest, the air turns cold. As we walk deeper in, he He seemed so kind, but I saw a flicker of madness in his mind. In the darkness his laughter rang too clear. As the trail grew narrow, I felt the fear. His footfalls close behind a sinister pursuit. The woods alive with a deadly dispute. Echoes of promises turned cruel and stark. In the hush of the night I made my mark. Wilderness shadows lurking in the glow, where friendly faces turn to danger unknown. Wilderness whisper, stories left untold. In the heart of the forest, the air turns cold. His game was cruel, a chase with no reprise, through tangled paths beneath the starless skies. My breath came quick, my heart a frantic drum. In the wild forest depths where the madman roams. Wilderness shadows. Game was cruel, a chase with no reprise, through tangled paths beneath the starless skies. My breath came quick, my heart a frantic drum. In the wild forest depths where the madman roams. Thank you. Thank you, crew, to Uncle Mel. As we walked deeper in, he seemed so kind, but I saw the flicker of madness in his mind. In the darkness, his laughter rang too clear. As the trail grew narrow, I felt the fear. His footfalls close behind a sinister pursuit. The woods alive with a deadly dispute. Echoes of promises turn cruel and stark. In the hush of the night I made my mark. His game was cruel, a chase with no reprise.